Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present my dissertation using machine learning for evidence-based decision-making in California public K-12 schools. Machine learning means using a statistical algorithm to learn patterns from existing data and estimating values for cases not used to learn those patterns. Leakage controlled means outcome information and evaluation cases were prevented from influencing model development. My study tested whether a transparent, distinct risk score could be developed in eligible non-large California districts, applied without refitting to a locked group of large districts, and interpreted responsibly in resource and attendance analyses. The contribution is a disciplined evidence process that separates prediction from evaluation, association from causation, and statistical output from leadership judgment. Education leaders, Educational leaders now have extensive administrative data, meaning records collected for routine reporting and operations, including enrollment, attendance, school structure, demographics, and expenditure. Those records do not automatically become valid decision evidence. A construct is the idea a variable is intended to represent, and construct validity asks whether the variable actually represents it. The denominator is the base quantity used to calculate a rate. When the numerator and denominator represent different populations or time rules, a precise calculation can still be conceptually wrong. Three concerns motivated this study. First, public records were not created specifically for this research question, so identifiers, missing codes, coverage, and definitions require verification. Second, a model can look artificially accurate when outcome information leaks into its inputs or evaluation cases affect preprocessing and tuning. Third, prediction is an estimate under observed patterns. It is not a decision, causal explanation, or proof that an intervention will work. I therefore treated measurement, model development, evaluation, uncertainty, and human accountability as one connected evidence chain. The problem had methodological, substantive, and interpretive dimensions. Methodologically, there were limited evidence that a distinct score developed outside the large district group would transport without leakage. Substantively, it was unknown how the fixed score related to schools reported state and local expenditure and to an attendance related outcome. Interpretively, the available outcome cannot be presented as an official chronic absence rate. A proxy is a researcher-conducted substitute used when the intended measure cannot be calculated exactly. Held that transport means applying a fitted model without retraining to a separate group reserved before a development. Its purpose was to develop the score in eligible non-large districts, transport it once to 42 locked large districts, and examine allocation alignment, adjusted proxy association, and moderation. All conclusions were bound to district-level same-cycle prediction and cross-sectional association, not an official rate, individual risk, future forecasting, or causal resource effects. The three research questions were intentionally distinct. Research question 1 asked whether the training-derived score explained variation in log state and local expenditure per pupil after controlling for log enrollment. Research question 2 asked whether the score explained variation in the matched school proxy after controlling the expenditure and enrollment. Research question 3 asked whether expenditure moderated the score proxy relationship. A regression coefficient is the estimated change in the outcome associated with a 1-unit change in a predictor while included controls are held constant. A null hypothesis states that the focal coefficient equals 0. A p-value measures how incompatible the observed result is with that null model. It is not the probability that the hypothesis is true. Alpha set at 0.05 was the pre-specified statistical threshold, which was the confidence interval that gives a range of values compatible with this estimate and its uncertainty. Moderation means that the estimated predictor outcome relationship changes with another variable and is tested with an interaction term. HC3 is a robust standard error adjustment that reduces sensitivity to unequal error variance and influential cases. Home adjustment is a stepwise correction that reduces false positives across the three primary tests. Formal decisions use the statistical significance, while effect size, interval width, fit, influence, and sensitivity determine how strongly each result could be interpreted. Theoretical framework. There's two complementary frameworks that will guide the interpretation. Transformational leadership is centered on shared purpose, intellectual challenge, trust, learning, and attention of people affected by decisions. Here it supports questioning assumptions, communicating uncertainty, and resisting blind deference to technical output. Data-informed decision-making means using data as one input to professional and contextual judgment through problem definition, construct verification, analysis, interpretation, action, and evaluation. The word informed matters because the data can contribute to judgment. They do not dictate a unique action. The figure places these frameworks around the measured evidence chain rather than inside the statistical model. The archival records did not measure leadership behavior, organizational culture, data literacy, or implementation. Therefore, the frameworks were interpretive lenses, not tested predictors or outcomes. They explain how bounded evidence should be questioned and governed, but they cannot repair an invalid denominator, create causal evidence, or prove operational readiness. Literature review, what the evidence establishes. The literature established four foundations. First, prediction research showed that development and evaluation must remain separate and that complex models should be compared with benchmarks. A benchmark is a simpler comparison model that's used to determine whether added complexity provides meaningful value. Second, chronic absence research showed that missing instructional time matters, but absence can reflect health, housing, transformation, school climate, family, and community conditions. A distinct district aggregate is not an individual diagnosis or an achievement measure. Third, school finance research showed that resources can improve outcomes under designs with credible temporal or policy comparisons. That literature also explains why a one-year expenditure coefficient cannot establish a causal effect, adequacy, or equity. Fourth, fairness and governance research showed that interpretal modeling, human review, ecological limits, primary purpose restriction, and consequence evaluation are necessary because high stakes use. Technical accuracy alone does not establish ethical legitimacy. The research gap was narrow. Student early warning, school finance, and analytics governance literatures were substantive, but they did typically address different units and questions. So less work integrates them at the district level by building a transparent score and once pre-specified population. So testing it without refitting across the district size and then examining it with a precise expenditure construct and aggregate attendance proxy. The contribution was an auditable evidence chain, so each decision could be traced and challenged from source definition and linkage through aggregation, eligibility, future construction, model fitting, locked evaluation, regression, and interpretation. Operational validation would mean evidence that a model performs reliably, fairly, and usefully in real decisions over time. This study did not establish that. It established a bounded same cycle transport test and an associational analysis. So now I'm going to move from the conceptual rationale to the implemented methodology. So this study used a quantitative cross-sectional non-experimental design with two linked stages. So quantitative means the questions were answered through numerical variables and statistical models. So cross-sectional means the variables came from the same reporting cycle rather than being followed across time. Non-experimental means I did not assign treatments, manipulate resources, or randomly place districts into conditions. Stage one was predictive. I developed a score in 222 eligible non-large districts, evaluated the procedure through repeated held out folds, compared benchmarks, and applied the same process once to 42 locked large districts. Stage two was correlational regression, which estimates conditional relationships among naturally occurring variables without reestablishing causation. Ordinary least squares, or LLS, that selects regression coefficients by minimizing square differences between observed and fitted outcomes. So each district contributed one equally weighted observation, so that the estimate was the average relationship across districts rather than students. Held out metrics answered whether the score transported regression coefficients, answered association questions, and neither stage caused temporal order or causal identification. Four assumptions allow the study to proceed. So an assumption is just a condition accepted as reasonable but not completely provable. So first, the federal records were assumed accurate enough for district aggregation after reserve code, range, logic, and coverage checks. Second, normalized identifiers were assumed to link the same institutions across files. Third, the specified linear models were assumed to provide useful summaries. Diagnostics and alternative models evaluate the assumption, but cannot prove that the form was uniquely correct. Fourth, I assumed that exact terminology and transparent uncertainty would help readers distinguish evidence from recommendation. So these assumptions were not treated as confirmed facts, and each remained connected to corresponding validity limitation. The most consequential limitations directly shaped interpretation. So first, the cross-sectional design could not establish whether expenditure preceded later attendance changes. Second, the outcome was a matched school proxy because the official membership denominator was unavailable. High match coverage reduced missing school distortion, and it did not establish denominator equivalence or eliminate possible duplication across school records. Third, all variables were district aggregates. So ecological inference means drawing individual conclusions from group level relationships. This study prohibited that. Fourth, the locked population contained 42 districts, limiting interaction precision and increasing the importance of influential cases. Fifth, the primary expenditure measure was narrow, and the all funds sensitivity changed both the fiscal definition and sample. A sensitivity analysis is a planned alternative used to test whether a conclusion changes under another defensible decision. Finally, second stage bootstrapping treated the trained score as fixed, and the study did not conduct a subgroup fairness or deployment consequence audit. The scope was deliberately narrow. So the study examined California public educational agencies in 2017 to 2018 CRDC and public use files. So the district was the unit of analysis after school records were linked and then aggregated. So the decision evaluated same cycle transport across a pre-specified size boundary and conditional associations in a locked group. Did not include student level records, other states, later years, interviews, surveys, or an intervention. It also did not produce an official chronic absence rate, future forecasts, causal resource effects, resource adequacy, judgment, or measured leadership effect. There were eliminations, meaning intentional boundaries. Each excluded claim will require a different source, unit, time, structure, or design. So the source population contained 1,840 California local educational agencies. The local educational agency, or LEA, is a federal district level public education entity that's used as the unit of analysis. So among the source agencies, 963 had a logical property value and at least 95% outcome coverage. The development range included 236 non-large candidates with matched school enrollment from 5,000 through 24,999. Of those, 222 met the outcome coverage and feature completeness rules and entered model development. The locked population contained all 42 agencies with LEA reported enrollment of at least 25,000. And everyone met the primary eligibility rules. So stricter accounting screen retained 35 districts for the all fund sensitivity. So this locked score represented approximately 2.15 million LEA reported students, 2,916 match schools, and 284,860 data group to 814 cases. Data group A14, abbreviated DGA14, is the federal school level chronic absence count used as the numerator source. So mean outcome coverage was 99.53%. Most importantly, no district identifier appeared in both the 222 district development group and the 42 district lock group. So that overlap protected the held out transport claim. Data sources and operational measures. So no survey, test, interview protocol, or participant instrument was administered. CRDC means the Civil Rights Data Collection, a federal collection of school and district civil rights and educational opportunity data. EDFACS is the federal K-12 reporting system. The LEA characteristics supplied district identifiers and scale. CRDC enrollment supplied enrollment and demographic counts. EDF data group 814, supplied school chronic absence counts. The expenditure file supplied state and local and all funds fields. Title 1 and school characteristics supplied structural features. An operational measure is the exact rule that's used to convert source fields into an analytic variable. The score used 13 district composition and school structure features. The proxy summed valid DG 814 counts and divided by enrollment at the same matched CRDC schools. The resource measure summed school reported state and local personnel and non-personnel expenditure and divided by enrollment at the same valid schools. It was not total district revenue adequacy, service quality, or within district equity. High coverage supported completeness, but it did not prove equivalence to an official construct. Reliability, validity, and credibility. So credibility was addressed at four levels. Reliability meant consistency of a procedure or a measure. Validity concerns were whether evidence supports the intended interpretation. Computational reliability came from one scripted pipeline, deterministic seeds, time-stamped outputs, preserved model objects, and explicit exclusions and hashes. SHA 256 created a digital fingerprint of a file. So if the file changes, its fingerprint changes, which allowed the final run to be linked to exact source and script bytes. So predictive validity came from repeated out-of-fault evaluation, which was a lock test, benchmarks, feature range checks, and calibration. So calibration asks whether predicted and observed values agree in level and scale. So a bootstrap estimates uncertainty by resampling districts with replacement and recalculating the statistic. Statistical conclusion validity was strengthened through HC3, home correction, bootstrap intervals, diagnostic, influence checks, leave one out refits, and sensitivities. These procedures improved rigor but did not remove the main boundaries. The outcome remained a proxy, the unit remained a district, and transport covered one state, 1 year, one outcome, definition, and one size boundary. So this study used public aggregate institutional records and did not involve individual student records or direct human participants. The American College of Education Institutional Review Board, or IRB, determined that the study did not include human subjects. So roll files remained read-only. Identifiers were retained only for linkage and district-level influence review, and every run wrote to a new output location. The ethical boundary extended beyond privacy because demographic composition entered the score. A technically accurate model could still stigmatize communities or support inequitable decisions. The, the analysis did not estimate a subgroup error, differential calibration, stakeholder acceptance, or real-world consequences. It therefore did not support the student labeling, punitive ranking, automation allocation, service withdrawal, or causal claims. So consequential use will require official outcome validation, later year testing, fairness and consequence review, stakeholder governance, an appeal process, and continued monitoring. Because there was archival research, data collection meant establishing source lineage rather than recruiting participants. So source lineage is the documented path that showed where data came from and how it entered the analysis. So the pipeline located the six supplied files, opened them without modification, restricted records to California, and preserved identifiers as strings, so leading zeros were retained. It then created a source manifest containing file path sizes and SHA-256 fingerprints. Every execution wrote to a new timestamp directory. The reproducibility claim is specific. The preserved local source bytes, script hash, rules, and outputs can be traced to a final run. So the dissertation does not invent download dates or portal history that were not preserved. Data preparation and leakage. So data preparation began by normalizing identifiers, meaning school and district codes were then converted into consistent text format. Negative Federal Reserve codes represent missing, suppressed, skipped, or inapplicable values were treated as missing rather than as real counts or zeros. So schools were linked one-to-one, aggregated to district, and then evaluated using construct-specific coverage rules. So data leakage occurs when information connected to the answer enters the development in a way unavailable under the stated evaluation condition. So the 42 large districts were locked prior to pre-processing, tuning, or fitting. So essentially, the model they were not available to the model during any of the ML stages. So their outcomes did not determine any of the imputation, scaling, model setting, or coefficients. So imputation fills those missing predictor values using a rule learned from training data. Scaling places predictors or comparable numerical units, and the feature is a model input. Expenditure fields, all DGA14 outcome fields, and direct total enrollment were excluded from the 13 features. Pre-processing and tuning occurred inside those training folds, which are partitions used during CV, or otherwise known as cross-validation. So no global pre-split imputation, automatic extreme case deletion, Windsorization, or manual repair was used. So these controls made the locked score externally generated relative to the second stage districts. So stage one developed and evaluated the risk score. So ridge regression's linear prediction method that adds L2 penalty to large coefficients. The regularization shrinks coefficients toward zero to produce instability when predictors overlap. Alpha is the hyperparameter controlling the penalty strength. The hyperparameter selected during tuning rather than estimated as an ordinary coefficient. The ridge pipeline included fold-specific computation, missingness indicators, scaling, and regression. Nested cross-validation uses the inner loop to select settings and a separate outer loop to evaluate the selected procedure. Five outer folds represented five times produced 25 held out fits, while four fold inner cross validation selected alpha from 25 candidates. The final alpha was 2.1544. So Ridge was then compared with the ordinary linear regression, random forest, and a training means benchmark. Random forest is just a nonlinear method that averages predictions from many trees. So the mean benchmark represented a no information comparison. Final models fit on all 222 development districts and applied once to the 42 block districts. So stage two used the fixed training standardized score. Standardization expresses values in development, sample standard deviation units. So RQ1 modeled the logged expenditure. RQ2 modeled the proxy percentage with score centered on expenditure and enrollment. And then RQ3 added the interaction. So OLS produced estimates. HT3 produced a primary inference, and home adjusted focal p-values. Bootstrap influence and sensitivity analysis evaluated the robustness. Assumptions and influence were evaluated separately for each primary model. Residual is just the observed outcome minus the fit value. So Shapiro-Wilks test whether the residuals show a detectable departure from normality, while the QQ plot provides a visual comparison. So the p-values were 0.447, 0.28, and 0.298. So no departure were detected. So heteroscedasticity meant just residual variability changes across fitted values. So Bruce pagan p-values were 0.212, 0.805, and 0.510. So no such pattern was detected. HC3 still retained because a non-significant diagnostic did not prove a perfect assumption. So multicollinearity meant substantial overlap among predictors. VIF, or variance inflation factor, measured how much that overlap inflates uncertainty. So maximum VIF was 1.03, 1.31, and 2.08. So the condition number measured numerical instability in the design matrix. So values of 2.31, 2.48, and 3.36 were also low. So influence diagnostics addressed individual districts. So leverage I just identified the unusual predictor combinations. Cook's distance summarizes overall influence. DF beta shows how much removing one case changes a coefficient, a specific coefficient. The LA Unified had the highest average, while Oakland and West Contra Costa were influential in particular models. No district was automatically deleted. Leave one analysis removed one district at a time and refit the model to reveal whether a conclusion depended on one case. I'm going to begin with the results with the locked transport test, followed by the three hypothesis decisions. Model validation did the score transport. The locked validation gate was satisfied. So that meant absolute error, or MAE, is the average absolute prediction error. Ridge MAE was 2.36 percentage points. Root mean square error, or RMSE, gave larger errors, more weight, and ridge RMSE was 3.04 percentage points. Predictive R squared compares model error with a variance mean error. So the value of 0.5339 indicated that ridge captured about 53.39% of locked proxy variation relative to that reference. So observed prediction correlation was 0.718, which showed strong movement together, though correlation alone did not establish the agreement. The training mean benchmark had an RMSE of 4.67. Bridge improved it by 1.64 percentage points, and then the paired 5,000 draw bootstrap interval for that difference ranged from a negative 2.34 to a negative point 0.1, excuse me, 0.95, entirely below zero. The calibration scope was 0.8509. One is ideal, so the score was informative, but it was not perfectly calibrated. And then ordinary linear regression achieved the RMSE of 3.05, which was essentially identical to Ridge. Random forest achieved 3.26. So the strongest conclusion is therefore that the pre-specified feature set transported under discipline validation, not that the Ridge or greater complexity provided a unique advantage. So this figure displays the observed proxy values horizontally and predictions vertically. So development points are repeated out of fold predictions. So out of fold meant that each prediction came from a model that did not train on that district, which was avoiding an optimistic in-sample performance. So the lock points were generated after model selection was completed in the 222 development districts. So the diagonal line represented perfect agreement. Points above it are predictions, and points below it were under predictions. So the patterns match the metrics. So predictions track the general ordering of the locked outcomes, which was consistent with the correlation of the 0.7518 and R squared of 0.5339, but they did not fall perfectly in a line, which was consistent with the RMSE of 3.04 and the calibration slope below 1. So this figure supports useful but imperfect transport. It did not support an exact score, perfect calibration, prospective forecasting, or replacement of official local attendance data. Findings, overview, and hypothesis decisions. So the three decisions differed in strength. So for RQ1, I rejected the null in the pre-specified state local model, but leave one out. Refit across zero point zero 0.05 and the all fund sensitivity was non-significant. So the conclusion was qualified allocation alignment. For RQ2, I rejected the null with the strongest evidence. So the fixed score made a substantial contribution. Its internal excluded 0, and every leave one out refit remained significant. So the conclusion was same construct held out transport, not validation on a new outcome. For RQ3, I did not reject the null. The primary interaction in most sensitivities were non significant. An alternative estimator disagreed, so it was reported as uncertainty rather than used to reverse the pre-specified decision. Primary models determine decisions, sensitivities qualify robustness. So RQ1 asks whether the score explained variation in log state and local expenditure per pupil after controlling for the logged enrollment. The enrollment only model explained virtually none of the resource variation, with R squared of 0.0003, which added the score increased R squared to 0.1977. So the score coefficient was 0.0669 with the HC3 standard error, otherwise 0.253, unadjusted p-value of 0.0118, and a robust confidence interval from 0.057 to 1.1181. The home adjusted p-value was 0.0236, and the bootstrap interval from 0.0154 and 0.1176 excluded 0. So because the outcome was logged, exponentiating the coefficient gave a percentage interpretation. So one development standard deviation higher score was associated with approximately 6.92% higher state and local expenditures per pupil, holding enrollment constant. So the transformed interval ranged from about 1.58 to 12.54%. So the result was qualified. The coefficient remained positive in all 42 leave one out refits. However, it admitted Oakland produced P equal to 0.837. So the accounting screening all fund sensitivity used 35 districts produced a coefficient of 0.04291 and a P equal to 0.374. So because that sensitivity changed both measure and sample, the resource of the difference cannot be isolated. I rejected the primary null, but the conclusions only qualified allocation alignment, so it did not establish adequate, equitable, efficient, or causal resource allocation. Resource question two asks whether the fixed score explained variation in the matched school proxy after controlling for expenditure and logged enrollment. So the controls only this controlled only the model. The only model had R square of 0.13295. Adding the score increased the R square to 5667 and an increase of 0.4272. So the score coefficient was 3.1789 percentage points. One development a standard deviation score was therefore associated with about 3.18 percentage points higher proxy value while the controls were held constant. So HC3 standard error was 0.5420 and the confidence interval ranged from point from 2.0816 to 4.2762, and the home adjusted p-value was approximately 0.000026, far below the 0.001. So the bootstrap interval ranged from about 2.3739 to 4.23903, with no estimate below zero. So the influence evidence was stable. The leave one district out estimate ranged from 3.0060 to 3.5767, and it remained significant in all 42 refits. So positive score relationship also remained under the all funds and then grade span sensitivities. After the score entered, expenditure was not significant. Its coefficient was roughly 0.1229 percentage points per additional $1,000, with a P equal to 0.813 and an interval crossing zero. So this did not prove spending had no effect. It just showed only that the baseline cross-sectional association did not remain after the model risk signal was represented. I rejected the null. So the defensible claim is same construct held out transport across non-overlapping district groups. It is not independent construct validation, causal explanation, future forecasting, or authorization for individual classification. RQ3 asks whether expenditure changed a fixed score proxy relationship. So the interaction model explained 58.02% of proxy variation, but it added the interaction increased R squared by only point zero one three five beyond the research question two. The interaction coefficient was negative 0.6408, and the primary percentage point model, the estimated score slope became 0.6408 percentage points smaller for each additional $1,000. of the centered expenditure, but the P was 0.294. The robust interval ranged from negative 1.8605 to a positive 0.5789, and bootstrap interval also caused zero. The broader evidence agreed that the non-significant primary result, the sort of all funds interaction was negative 0.1260 with a P 0.839. So the grade span adjusted interaction was negative 0.5331 with a P of 0.393. So each leave one out interaction P value remained above the zero point zero 0.05, put the zero point zero 0.05 alpha. Fractional logic, which is a generalized linear model for proportions bounded between 0 and 1, it reported coefficients on a log odds scale, so they're not directly comparable to OLS percentage points coefficients. So that sensitivity produced P equal to point 0.3, excuse me, 0.0342, showing the functional form uncertainty. So I did not select a favorable sensitivity after seeing it. So the pre-specified OLS model, bootstrap, leave one out, all funds and grade span results did not support robust moderation. I therefore did not reject the null. So this is not proof that resources never matter or that the true interaction is zero. It just meant that pre-specified moderation was not reliably detected in this design. So now I'm going to interpret the findings in relation to prior research, leadership practice, and then future inquiry. So these findings connect to three literatures. First, the model comparison supports validation scholarship. So Ridge transported and beat the no information mean, but ordinary linear regression performed almost identically. So results favored the least complex adequate model rather than assuming the machine learning label proved superiority. Second, the resource findings align with school finance research that distinguishes resource importance from design strength. So the stronger studies use temporal or policy variation to identify effects. My my cross-sectional models could describe alignment and association, but do not inherit causal conclusions. Research question one also showed why exact fiscal definitions and samples matter. Third, the samples extend data-informed decision-making and governance of research by keeping construct boundaries, uncertainty, and contradictory sensitivities visible. So the contribution is not that ambiguity disappeared, it's just that ambiguity was documented rather than hidden beyond one favorable model or coefficient. So the strongest leadership implication was just that governance process, not allocation formula. So governance means the rules, roles, review steps, documentation, and accountability structure control how evidence is used. So leaders should first define the exact decision construct, unit, and purpose. So therefore, they should audit the source, lineage, denominators, coverage, reserve codes, and counting consistency. Third, they should review the lock performance and calibration against a benchmark. Fourth, they should examine influence, sensitivity, subgroup fairness, and then consequences of false reassurance or false alarm. Third, they should combine the model output with official local data, program knowledge, qualitative evidence, and stakeholder perspective. So only then should they authorize bounded action founded by prospective evaluation. So the score should be an inquiry signal, which means a pattern that prompts verification, not a distinct label, student diagnosis, or funding rule. So leaders should display estimates, intervals, sample size, influential case results and materially different sensitivities together. So stop rule is just a pre-specified reason to pause or reject the use, while a weak construct validity, missing official denominators, poor calibration, unknown fairness consequences, or a decision exceeding the district level unit should stop deployment. Human accountability needs to remain visible throughout. So future research should begin by repairing measurement. So the proxy should be reconstructed with official federal membership denominator and then compared with California's unduplicated count and eligible cumulative enrollment denominator. Researchers should quantify how the denominator choice, timing, and then possible duplications affect district values. So next is perspective temporal validation. So perspective means fixing the predictors before an untouched later outcome period. So repeated later year tests would reveal performance and calibration drift, which means predicted observed agreement changes over time. So the pipeline should then be replicated in other states, size strata, rural and suburban systems, and then reported environments. So resource research should move from the aggregated totals to specific services. Timing cover, dosage, and then implementation. So quasi-experimental design should use credible policy-based or naturally occurring comparisons when random experiment is not feasible and not would be needed to estimate resource effects. Finally, future work should evaluate the subgroup errors, stakeholder interpretation, organizational adoption, appeal mechanisms, and real consequences. So the sequence is repair to measure, test time and place, identify mechanisms, evaluate fairness and implementation. Growth as a leader. The doctoral journey changed how I approached analytical leadership. Technically, I moved from asking whether a model could produce an answer to asking whether the complete evidence pipeline could withstand audit, replication, benchmark comparison, influence analysis, and contradictory sensitivity results. Scholarly, I learned to state exactly what a variable measure and to preserve the distinctions among the prediction, explanation, association, causation. I also learned that limitations are not a defensive language added at the end of the study, but when documented honestly, they define the scope and credibility of the contribution. As a leader, I now view transparency, uncertainty reporting, stop rules, stakeholder accountability, and the authority to reject a model as core leadership practices. A central shift for me was simply using data to governing evidence responsibly. And that shift connected my technical background, doctoral research training, and then responsibility for decisions that affect people. Final conclusions and what this study adds. So three conclusions that summarize the study. So first, the feature set transported across the district size boundary. Ridge achieved the RMSE of 3.04 percentage points and predictive R square of 0.5339, reliably beating the training mean. Although ordinary linear regression performed almost identically, the evidence supported disciplined feature construction and validation more strongly than model complexity. Second, the resource evidence was conditional. So research question one it showed a positive primary association equivalence of about 6.92 percentage points percentage higher state and local expenditure per pupil for a one standard deviation higher score, but it was influence sensitive and did not produce any the all funds analysis. So expenditure was non-significant after score adjustment in RQ2, and moderation wasn't as robust in RQ3. So third, the main contribution to preservation of evidence boundaries. So prediction did not establish causation, allocation alignment, did not establish adequacy or equity. So a significant sensitivity did not override the non-significant pre-specified interaction. So the score's defensible role is to organize a district level inquiry under transparent human governance, not to function as a official rate, individual label, future forecast, causal rule, or automatic allocation formula. So these selected sources directly inform the study's theory, methods, and interpretation. And this is the complete APA reference list included for your dissertation. Thank you for your time, your guidance, and an opportunity to present this study. I welcome your questions, and I also will answer each question directly, explain the methodological reasoning, and then state the boundary of what evidence can support it.